Now, a senior advisor to Iran's leader says that the country's involvement in the fight against terrorism in Iraq comes at the legitimate and legal request of Baghdad. Ali Akbar Velayati made the remark in a meeting with visiting UN Special Envoy for Iraq, head of the Strategic Research Center, Iran's Expediency Council, stressed the need for preventing foreign interference in Iraq's internal affairs. He reiterated that the UN can play a very important role in fulfilling the needs of the Iraqi people to achieve that aim. Velayati underlined Tehran's unwavering opposition to any plot aimed at partitioning Iraq. Velayati stressed Tehran supports neighboring countries' territorial integrity. UN envoy Jan Kubis stressed the need for the Iraqi people to fight terrorism. He also expressed hope the country's provincial elections will lead to stability throughout the Arab nation.
Russia has rejected U.S. President Donald Trump's accusation that Iran is a, quote, terrorist state, saying that the Kremlin does not agree with this position. The Kremlin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, added that Moscow and Washington have diametrically opposed views on many international issues. He also said that Russia values its, quote, partner-like relations with Iran and wants its economic ties with Tehran to further expand. Meanwhile, a Russian Foreign Ministry official has warned the U.S. against making any changes to a landmark nuclear deal between Iran and the P5+1 group of countries in 2015. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov added that it would be too risky to revise the nuclear deal, officially known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Navid Nasr, also news of the U.S. approach towards Russia being that it wants to drive a wedge in order to steer Russia into its sphere. But right now, obviously, Russia is against what the U.S. termed Iran as being a sponsor of terrorism.
That's correct. It's an interesting game that the U.S. is playing foreign policy-wise here in terms of trying to drive Russia away from both Iran and China, because we live in an age where there's precious few actual secrets that we're talking about, U.S. foreign policy in terms of Iran and China with regards to Russia. This is something that's out there. People are talking about it. I'm sure that the people high up in the Russian government and even not so high up know how to use Google. So it's, you know, I don't exactly know what the U.S. thinks it's going to be able to accomplish here. I'm hoping and I'm praying, and I think I'm right, that the Russian government, particularly higher up people in the Russian government, are under no illusion about who Trump is and what he is, and ultimately how much they can or can't trust him. I'm hoping that I'm right about that, because, you know, he is not, just like anyone in that position, he is not really fully a man to be trusted. And he might be saying nice things about Putin right now, but that may not be the case down the road. And you know, it's just not a good idea on Russia's part to abandon its allies. People, you know, states that have been allied with it for a long time now for the sake of a lot of mutual goals and mutual interests. And I don't think that's going to happen, but I think the Trump administration is going to try that. No doubt about that.
Thank you, Navid Nasr, radio host and political commentator.
Well, Iran says that it has put on its agenda the imposition of sanctions against certain American individuals and companies to reciprocate Washington's moves.
We are considering imposing sanctions on a number of American institutions, individuals, and companies that help Takfiri elements and terrorists in the region, such as members of Daesh and other groups, and that have been aiding and abetting the Israeli regime in cracking down on oppressed Palestinian people.
Qasimi further touched upon a fresh round of talks on settling the Syria conflict, which got underway in the Kazakh capital Astana on Monday. He reiterated that Iran will continue to defend Syria's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Elsewhere in his remarks, Qasimi said the Israeli regime is constantly plotting against Iran and some other regional nations, saying that it won't be able to achieve its anti-Iran goals. He also lashed out at British Prime Minister Theresa May's stance on Iran, dismissing it as wrong, unjustified, and opportunistic. Lecturer of University of Tehran, Mr. Mohammad Marandi, joins us now on the line from the Iranian capital, Tehran. Professor Marandi, welcome to the program. Give us your thoughts on the recent comments made by the Foreign Ministry spokesman Bahram Ghasemi, stating that now Iran, as a reciprocal move, has on its agenda the imposition of sanctions against certain American individuals and companies.
Well, I think it's more symbolic than anything else. Of course, we have to see the sanctions list. Iran doesn't do much trade with the United States, but I think Iran and its supporters across the region and beyond have to really think deeply about whether it is really appropriate to buy and purchase goods that are made by American companies when there are alternatives. Is it appropriate to buy an Apple, let's say, computer or laptop or tablet or an iPhone when their government is bombing other countries, or when they're aligning themselves with barbaric regimes like Saudi Arabia to destroy the lives of millions in Yemen or in Syria? So I think it's really for as a community of people, for us to rethink how we conduct ourselves in society, and what constitutes responsible behavior. Is it really appropriate to buy, purchase goods from Disney, or to go to institutions that give money to the United States? Would it not be better for people, instead of buying from American companies, to buy from companies that belong to countries that are not hostile to Iran or other peoples in this region or elsewhere in the world? So the Iranian government has a responsibility, but I think we also have each of us have our own responsibility in this regard.
And also, Mr. Marandi, this morning, elsewhere in his comments, Mr. Ghasemi said the Israeli regime is constantly plotting against Iran and some other regional nations as well. He also added that the Israeli regime will not be able to achieve its anti-Iran goals. Elaborate on that statement and those comments as well for us.
I don't think there's anything new about what he said. It is interesting how the Israelis and Saudi Arabia are now becoming so open, coming out openly in their alliance with one another, and how we see so many public statements coming from senior officials, especially in Israel, when they speak about the Saudi regime or the Qatari regime or the Emirati regime, but specifically the Saudi regime. But I also think that in addition, Israel is moving towards self-destruction, especially as it is moving towards a so-called one-state solution. Because while Israel is an apartheid regime, and it is morally illegitimate, and anyone who accepts its legitimacy is behaving immorally, but a one-state solution will make Israel more obviously an apartheid state in the eyes of the whole of the international community. And it will be impossible to hide this reality in future. So, ironically, by pushing for the further subjugation of the people of Palestine in the West Bank, and by taking over more and more land with the support of the United States, with the support of the current and previous administrations in the United States and many European countries, even though they officially condemn it, but Europeans condone it behind the scenes through their actions, this one-state solution is going to push Israel in a position where ultimately it's going to, I think, achieve the same results as apartheid South Africa.
The U.S. president has once again denounced Iran's nuclear deal with the P5+1 group of countries.
I think it was the worst deal I've ever seen negotiated. I think it was a deal that should have never been negotiated. Absolutely, the deal that was made by the Obama administration. I think it's a shame that we've had a deal like that and that we had to sign a deal like that, and there was no reason to do it. And if you're going to do it, have a good deal.
In an interview with Fox News, Donald Trump claimed that the historic accord had not been fully enforced. Trump also accused Tehran of sending money and weapons, quote, all over the place. The U.S. president said Iran had, quote, total disregard for America. He further threatened to impose more sanctions on Iran just days after the U.S. Treasury Department announced new anti-Tehran measures following the Islamic Republic's missile test. Trump has on several occasions slammed the nuclear deal and pledged to repeal or renegotiate it. However, American political figures have warned the brash billionaire against the move, saying that it would isolate the U.S. To discuss that, we're now joined Mr. Pai Ian, who is an independent researcher and commentator, and he's joining us live now from Irvine. Mr. Ian, thanks for joining us. How do you feel about Donald Trump's comments?
I said for months, including on your network, on rolling coverage during the election results coming in November 8th of 2016, that neither Trump nor really modern presidents of the United States are ultimately in charge. Trump is taking dictation from very powerful and very frustrated and very frightened lobbies here in the United States as well as in Europe and abroad in the Middle East. It's not about nuclear weaponry because Iran has held fastidiously to the JCPOA ever since initial discussions were made. There is no incentive in Iran or amongst its leadership to in any way break the JCPOA because it was a deal that was foreseen as allowing for opportunities that had been denied to Iran economically and just globally for decades. So Iran is not in the habit of entering into very complex agreements that are international in scope that involve multiple countries and then backing out of it just for out of whim. This is transparently something that is being broken by the United States unilaterally, despite the fact that there are other nations involved in negotiating this JCPOA agreement. And it's in large part due to Iran doing things that, although the United States government and its closest allies, England and Israel, are not at liberty to state outright in justifying the belligerence, the threats to tear up the JCPOA and other actions to be taken, but that beg the question over what actually is happening out there in the world. So Iran is outmaneuvering, they're crushing ISIS alongside their partners and allies, Russia, Iraq, and Syria, and that was not meant. That wasn't meant to be planned that way. It was meant to be ISIS breaking through Syria and allowing for a balkanization of that country, allowing for regime change, and allowing for longer-term American and Israeli platforms to follow throughout the Middle East. That obviously is null and void. You have Turkey, which was previously very anti-Assad, now allying with Iran, with Russia, with China, and at this point with the Syrian government as is, in order to bring this conflict to a close and to fight terrorism in the genuine sense rather than as a ploy to try and achieve other geostrategic aims. So out of frustration, you have these lobbies now with their puppet Donald Trump at the helm of the executive branch of the U.S. government, threatening in part to let these other allies of Iran, which is Russia and China foremost, but then Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and others, know to back off, know that the stakes are high enough to where this quote-unquote madman theory-laden new president is unpredictable. And all the while, the U.S. military, the most sober of strategists, know that Iran is not Iraq, it is not Syria, it is not Libya, it is not Afghanistan. You had British strategists basically rightly calling Iran on par with Russia and other great powers out there. and thus, at the very least, as I said, a sober approach needs to be taken with regard to engaging. But because they are not able to now meet acute goals with regard to Syria, and they really needed Assad out of power, and they can't do that because of Iran and Russia, then they need to start throwing belligerents to match that pre-prepared script to have Trump be, Nixon to the fourth power, basically madman theory, unpredictable, potentially unhinged. The man's been in power less than 3 weeks in the United States, and practically everything coming out of his mouth, anything that he's signed, is causing division, is causing fear. This is all by design, and again, it's not up to his own will. He is primarily just following the script put before him.
Mr. Ian, we have about a minute left. I'm wondering, in 2017, we're in a multipolar world, obviously, and the U.S. doesn't get to call all the shots throughout the world. Does this, as Iran says and has said from day one, will such moves isolate the United States further?
It will, because the U.S. is labeling others as extremists, whereas they're committing to more extremism and more unpredictability. And these are signs of weakness. When you commit to something and you blame it on a prior administration or not, but it's not an issue of Democrat versus Republican, it's an issue of follow-through. You cannot commit to something and then break it apart when things don't 110% go your way. And it will isolate the U.S. further vis-a-vis Europe, vis-a-vis the Building Silk Road Eurasian project, and practically every other continent. And maybe that's by design. We really need to look at these things systemically and historiographically to see if this isn't the hyper elite throwing the towel in on the United States and the dollar project over the past 104 years.
Okay, Mr. Ian, we'll leave there at that. But of course, as always, we appreciate you sharing your insight with us here on Press TV.